Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Safe Podcast. This is our third episode in which I talk to Dr. Shane Doyle, who is a professor of instruction and curriculum at Montana State University and overall a community advocate who does a lot of work in the area, trying to bring his Native American roots as a Crow Native American sort of into the mainstream. And he gives lectures on Native American history and other aspects of history, and they're fascinating, and he's a very wise guy. In this conversation, I learned so much, much more than you would expect to learn in an hour, and I'm hoping you guys will all do the same. um, yeah, that's pretty much all I have to introduce. Enjoy the episode.
So, the community that I grew up in on the Crow Indian Reservation, um, it's isolated geographically speaking, from pretty much most major, urban areas, um, but not as bad as other reservations. So, where I grew up, there was Billings, that was about an hour drive away, and then Sheridan, Wyoming. And, we shop there and go to movies and go to the mall and just learn about, you know, the world off the reservation, I guess you could say. And then I watched TV all the time, and I was a reader. Um, and so I always tell people, growing up on the reservation at that time was like growing up behind a two-way mirror because, I felt like I could see out. I had radio. Although my radio was limited, we'd only had about a couple stations and they were country. And so I could only really listen to uh, pop music when I was in Billings. And because the FM radio station wouldn't get all the way to Crow Agency. And my mom didn't have an FM radio in the car, so I had a little boombox I carried with me, and then I had a tape. It was had a tape deck in there, and so I would record the songs off the radio when we would go shopping in Billings. So that was my form of iTunes, I guess. And but I think, you know, growing up on the Crow Indian Reservation, when I did, you really did feel separated and isolated from most of American society. And I say growing up behind a two-way mirror because no one ever seems to be looking back, and you never really see yourself reflected or your community reflected anywhere else in American society. I mean, you're not there in the movie theater, you're not on the radio station, you're not on TV, you're not in the newspapers really, very rarely. No, not in the magazines. Back then, the magazines were People magazine, and still like Time and Newsweek, but I mean, there were more like social magazines that people read all the time. Like I said, People was the one that comes up, and there was a Us. I think there was a Us Weekly, and you never saw Native people in any of those publications. And so I felt like I was both empowered by that and of course also disempowered by that, but empowered by it by the fact that I felt like I was pretty free to choose my own identity as an American, and as an American Indian, um, because the community I lived in and the family that I grew up with was pretty free for people to do that, and so in that sense I felt like I know who I was, and I felt good about that. And but I think in a larger sense, and especially when you leave the reservation, and you confront stereotypes and other things like that. But I think you also learn about your community like anyone else. When you leave your community, you go out, you go and see the world, get an education or whatever. Then you're finally able to put your own community into some kind of a context, into a global uh, situation. And so, and I think that, a lot of my life has been that since I think for most Native people growing up on an Indian reservation, that is going to be um, their primary identity for the rest of their lives. And they're going to be looking at the world through that lens. And even if you leave the reservation, even if you go live someplace else, and there are people, of course, who do that. And, Um, they typically stay connected to their families, but I think even when you do that, um, there's an identity there that you formed as a child, that you form as a child. And in my case, I had a big extended family. I grew up, my mother was a single parent. I never knew my dad. But in my mom's family, she had nine brothers and sisters. And so I had a lot of aunts and uncles and first cousins. And they were all like brothers and sisters to me. And in fact, in there, we don't have a word for cousin. And we don't have words for aunt or uncle. In our language, we just say brother, sister, mom, and dad. So our aunts and uncles are like our parents as well. And I think also at the time that I was growing up, I think probably people don't realize or understand that tribal communities were really fractured early on, um, both purposefully and through just the American experience, but purposefully through boarding schools and the Indian relocation and a lot of other, uh, I guess, uh, U.S. government proposals to and strategies to assimilate American Indians into mainstream society and pretty much um, disintegrate native culture, and that started with boarding schools and it went up right, like I said, right up and through the 1970s. Finally, at the end of the 1960s, the government decided to change their policy to self-determination, and we've been in that era of federal policy since about 1970, 1972, which is right when I was born. So I inherited a boatload of trauma, from generations of people who had been experienced, some of the worst things that people could endure. I mean, death, onslaught, military defeat, like I said, the boarding school experience, um, unemployment, uh, complete loss of self-control. Really, there was really very few things that Native people could do to determine their own course of action. I think in the early 20th century here in Montana, um, and so I kind of inherited all that. But right at the time when I think people were starting to feel a little more hopeful about what could be in Indian country. And so during my lifetime, there's been a lot of changes in the law. And I think one of the biggest ones happened when I was 7 years old in 1979. There was the American Indian Religious Reformation Act. And the American Indian, up until like 1979, even ceremonies like the Sundance were illegal. And up into like the 1990s, the peyote ceremony, which is widely used today out here in the West, was not necessarily legal, and in fact was made illegal by the Supreme Court back in the early 90s. And it took an act of Congress, the American Indian Religious Freedom Reformation Act. So the first one in 1979 was the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. And then in 1994, they did the Reformation. But both of those acts legalized, if you can imagine this, actually legalized Native American ceremonies because before that, they were illegal. There were parts of those ceremonies that if you did them at certain times, you could be arrested and, you know, put in jail and face a penalty for conducting an ancient ceremony that had been around here on the continent, for who knows how long. And so, it hasn't been that long since things have really started to change for Native people. And I can tell you that because of all those different things, uh, you see a hodgepodge and a smorgasbord, if you will, of tribal culture and Christianity and everything else under the sun in Native communities today. And because we're influenced by so many different things, and Christianity has been huge since it first came, and and it plays a huge role in the community today. Many different denominations, and I think most people on my reservation, if they don't identify as Christians, they have a Christian
Hmm.
somehow background experience that they share. And so myself, growing up as a kid, we started going to church, um, and I think my mom wanted me to have, that religious foundation, spiritual foundation, because she understood that was a real important uh, part of, self-identity, and that, you know, it's just part of growing up. There's such a mystery to life, and there's so many questions that can't be answered not only by our parents but by anybody else. That at some point, we all have to walk out into the abyss, if we're really curious. And um, so I think that in tribal communities, that metaphor there has been actually, a real thing for them. I mean, we've practiced fasting, going out in the hills and the mountains by ourselves, with no food or water, you know, um, looking for answers or for power, for strength, for something, something that nobody else can give us.
Hmm.
And I think that's this that's the thing that, religion and spirituality, or that connection to the great mystery, if you will, um, allows us to do. It allows us to confront and to embrace and to, play with that side of ourselves that everyone has. Um, and so I think, I was interested, and I enjoyed it very much, going to church as a kid and Sunday school and all that, but there was a lot of things I think about the church that left me wanting more. And so I think, when I went off, and I think, so in my extended family, there were people who did, some of them were not religious at all, um, religious. Some of them attended church, some of them were like Native American, traditional. And so I could see all of those people, doing their own thing. And some did both, but some just did the one thing. And I could see that, this was kind of a personal choice that people made. And so when I got off into college, I started, hanging out with the Indian Club. And there was a guy here in Bozeman who was a tribal elder who kind of took me under his wing, and he used to run a sweat lodge ceremony every weekend, every Sunday. And so I started going into the sweat with him. And so he would pick me up, Sunday morning. We would go out, and we'd get a little something. We'd stop at the gas station and get some deli sandwiches, some microwave deli sandwiches or whatever, and then
Delicious.
yeah, and flaming hot Cheetos. And and then we'd stop at the payphone and call people, "Oh, we're gonna go start the fire," and because once we got out to the sweat before cell phones, it was like you were all out there, no one knew you were out there. And so we would invite people, then we'd go out and we'd start the fire. We'd get the rocks ready, and we'd get the sweat lodge ready, we'd get the water prepared, we get the switches ready. The switches are what you use to hit your back when you're in the ceremony, pro style. And we'd have a lot of people come out. And the sweat lodge ceremony is a very powerful ceremony. It is hard to describe, unless you have been in there, because it's so hot. The Crow Indians, it's just kind of ridiculous how hot it can get in there. You imagine putting yourself in you're cooking potatoes on the stove and then crawling in there and getting in there with the potatoes. It's almost like that. And so there's that aspect to it. But then there's the community aspect, and there's the sacred bear root that's put on the rocks, that's fills the lodge with smoke, and that smoke, you breathe it in and it cleans your lungs. It kills the bacteria and the fungus that's all in the air, and it's antiviral, and and it makes you remember who you are, and it connects you to the earth, and to all those people who have used that bearwood over the years. And then you put the cedar on the rock. That cedar, same thing, the smell, such a sacred smell. And I remember the priests used to use sacred cedar at during Christmas, and as a little boy, smelling that smell, and also my cousin, uh, her mom was Cheyenne, and so her grandpa was a traditional Cheyenne elder and medicine man, and he'd come over on her birthday, and he would burn cedar, and he would pray for her, and I remember that smell, and that same smell that I smelled in church, I smelled at this traditional Cheyenne birthday party, and I also smelled it in the sweat lodge, and that smell somehow connected all those things. You know, when you smell something like that and you breathe it in, it's a medicine that, and it can take you physically and mentally and emotionally, spiritually to places that are, sacred. So I think I began to understand, through the sweat lodge, the power of all those things. And then, the water. And, when you're in the sweat lodge and, whoever's pouring, they have that, it's pitch black in there, but they have the bucket of water, and they have a ladle. And I remember, Frank used to like play with the water as he would pray and talk to us. You could hear the water kind of dripping in there, and pouring out. And so soothing, and nice to hear that water. And, there's just nothing more sacred than water. And then pouring that water onto those rocks and hearing that steam, and feeling it. And then your own sweat coming out, and it's just really, like I said, once you start doing it, once you're involved with it, it's a very powerful way to heal, to cleanse, to connect with the world, with history, with the future. You're praying for the future. The last round of this, and in each round of the sweat lodge, so there's 4 rounds, and in the crow style, the one that I learned, each round is different, and they pass the prayer each round to the person on the left. And so, 4 different people get to pray, and they get to kind of control when the door goes up and how much water goes on. And so it's a community ceremony that, even though one person kind of leads it, everybody kind of has to
Hmm.
has to take part if it's going to work. And so there's that bonding there, and then the friendships that are formed, and the conversations that are held there at the uh, at the sweat lodge while you're building the fire and waiting for the rocks to get hot. You know, you talk about your life. You talk about your problems. You talk about great memories that you've had. You know, things that you're struggling with, or your hopes, your dreams. And so, there's a lot there. I mean, it's a great thing. And I think once you're introduced to that, then it's easier to become more acquainted and become more involved with other native ceremonial aspects. And so there's a whole world of tribal ceremonial culture out there here in the Northern Plains. And, there's a sweat lodge. That's a like a thing that you can do. It takes probably, the shortest you can get it done is probably 3 or 4 hours, because you have to build the fire, you get the rocks hot, and you have the ceremony and all that. So it takes some time. And then there's the bigger ceremonies like Sundance that they do in the summer, and that's like a 4-day thing. But then the preparation and the afterwards, you're talking about at least a week or more. And then there's the peyote ceremony, which is a big one here in Montana. The Crows. My stepdad was way into peyote, and we had peyote meetings a lot every year. A lot of them down by the river. You're close to his house, and that's an all-night ceremony. It starts
Mm.
in the evening at like 9 or 10 p.m. and it lasts all night long, and it doesn't end until like the next morning at like 6 or 7. And
Wow.
so, yeah, it's really hard. I mean, you have to sit up all night long, and of course, you get tired, and there's no chairs. You can't sit in a chair. You're sitting on the ground. You can sit on a pillow, but unless you're in good shape, your back's going to get tired. There's going to be other things that are going to hurt, and you're using the peyote to kind of help you, you know, finish the ceremony because the peyote gives you that energy. It gives you the strength. It's the medicine that kind of helps you stay up and do that ceremony.
Hmm.
But that's another thing that's not for everybody. And then there's all the other smaller ceremonies that people don't even really think too much about, and just like burning sweetgrass before you get into the car, or little things like that. And then the other ones that are done in public, like the naming ceremonies, where people get names and they have to have it in a public setting so that everyone can know the name, hear about the story behind it. And then there's adoption ceremonies, and that has to take place in public where people are adopted so that the community sees and understands, that there's a new family being created. And so the ceremonies they go on and on and on. I mean, and we only think typically of like the big ones, like I said, the sweat lodge, the Sundance. The Sundance is like iconic around the world because it's one of the most extreme physical, and that was the one that was outlawed. I mean, when the white people saw that, they were like, no, no, you guys can't be doing that. Yeah, that's illegal,
Hmm.
because they would go and they still today, like the Lakota, they go 4 days with no food or water. And at some point in the ceremony, for the ones who are asking for it, they get pierced through the chest with eagle talons. The talons are connected to strings, ropes, and then they're also can be connected in the back and they're hoisted into the air, pulled up off the ground just by these things that are attached to their skin. And then when they bring them back down, the way they get those things out is they have to rip them out. They don't gently take them out. You have to rip, your skin has to tear. So there's these big scars that are left, and then they have this medicine they put in there to stop it from getting infected. But you see where I'm going with this.
Hmm.
This is the kind of stuff that can transform a person into someone that you know you might very well be afraid of. Because when people do things like that, they have to let go of pieces of themselves and embrace a new mystery and something that they don't know is going to happen. And that's fun, but it's also scary. And let's say these guys are warriors, and let's say they want to have a revolt. Well, I don't think you're going to scare them. You're not going to be, these are not the kind of people who get scared, and so the government had to do something to shut that down because they could see we can't coexist guys down. We have to put all their traditions out. We have to get rid of all this stuff because until that day, they're going to be a threat. There will always be a threat. And the government always, I think, never understood Native people because we never wrote any books and we never had anything that they could study on us. And so that other part of the mystery there made people think, what are these people capable of? I mean, we just don't know what they're capable of. I think that fear of the unknown and the fear of the ceremonies that we did, and just like, who does that?
Hmm.
And then like going off into the hills and the mountains and fasting for 4 days with no food or water. Like, who does that? Like, why do people, you hear people say that, like, why would you do that? And it's like, well, that was their thing. I mean, they learned it from somebody else and somebody else taught them that. And so that's what they did. and it's still here today. And I think, my uncle, I had an uncle who was a sun dancer. He sun danced, and he did those traditional things, and he took me to the medicine wheel when I was a little boy with my other cousins. The medicine wheel is a sacred site up in the Bighorn Mountains, and that's the origin of the sun dance ceremony. And people still go up there. It's a national historic site now, so it's protected, federal protection,
Mm-hmm.
and Native people still use it, of course. Um, and there's other medicine wheels around, but that's the most famous one.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I think it was just in my blood since I was a kid, and even though and I respect all religions and all faiths and ceremonies, but I think I'm just mostly connected to that one that my ancestors passed on down to me, because I feel like that's my inheritance, and and I like it. I'm thankful for it. I'm grateful, and I don't always, I haven't been in the sweat lodge for a while because my life is busy, and you don't have time. I don't have time like I used to, but I still, in my own way, have a ceremony every day to prepare myself, in the
Mm-hmm.
morning, to center myself, remember who I am, and my purpose, and how I fit into the scheme of things. You know, um, I think as I've gotten older, I've begun to see, as we fit into the scheme of things, it gets pretty crazy wild. I mean, there's been so many generations before us that led up to us, and then there'll be so many after us, and our place is just so small and um, just fleeting, but also critically important, because if it's not for us, then we don't carry on, right? And so there's that there's that crazy balance, I think, and I think that Native culture has always really recognized and respected that balance, and that's where the circle comes from, and that's the medicine wheel, and all the things that we do, we seek a balance. We see the natural world, the full moon, the sun, a drop of water, when you drop a rock on a pond. I mean, the natural way of the world is the circle. And, we understood and recognized that when we make ourselves and our minds and our hearts that way, then we reverberate it on forever. And just like a wheel that is, doesn't have any bumps on it. It just keeps on going down the hill. And I think there's a metaphor there, and we learn those metaphors. We speak of them in our language, but they're also, very much also literal.
Mm-hmm.
They're literal. We are the very blood that carries across this land and mixes into the ground, and into the air, and passes forward until the day that it doesn't.
That's beautiful,
So
Shane.
I've been talking for a long time. Yeah, I should probably stop for a while and let you, if you have any questions.
So my first question is, so a while ago you used the term American Indian to refer to yourself and your people, and I've heard this isn't historically accurate. Is there a reason you still throw it in here and there?
Oh yeah, I mean that's the term I grew up with,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think even though academics want us to be historically accurate, um, there's other facets to our life besides historical accuracy, and I think just knowing what we're talking about, I think is good enough.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm not always politically correct, and I think you'll find that most Native people are not.
Okay.
We use the term Indian a lot. I will say though, in Montana we use the term Indian, but if you go down to New Mexico, where there's a whole bunch of Native people, they don't like that term at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you would hear them say that we're not Indians. Indians are from India, but
Mm-hmm.
here in Montana, we get what we're talking about.
Cool. I once
Mhm.
heard one person say they use the term just as a constant reminder of American stupidity. They just get a kick out of it. So,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like I said, we're a little bit more isolated up here in Montana.
mhm,
And not, I mean, now in the internet age, things have changed a lot, but I still think that the sensibilities that you see in the urban areas are not necessarily the same sensibilities that you see in Montana.
mhm.
Hmm.
Gotcha.
Hmm.
Yeah, Montana is such a special place. Seriously, I loved being there. Can't wait. JR is trying to get us to go back this summer. It's just
Yeah, I
different.
hope you do.
Yes, I hope so
Yeah.
too.
Yep.
Um, well, so one thing I always have wanted to ask you actually is how do you maintain like a compassionate, optimistic, open-hearted perspective in the face of what has happened to your people?
Hmm. Well, it's a good question. I think a lot of people do get cynical. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's hard not to. We've had so many treaties broken and promises unfulfilled, and then you look at our communities now, and we're struggling, especially mine. Um, and there's all that history there, like I said earlier, the trauma that we've inherited.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think, despite all those bad things and all those negative things, we still have a lot of love in Indian country, and we're taught and shown by our elders to have compassion and to have love. And you know, my grandmother was taken off to boarding school when she was 7, and she never saw her mother again. And I think she had a hard life. She raised 10 children, um, and during a time when you know the middle of the 20th century, uh, racism, all the other different things that Native people had to face, to disintegrate, as I mentioned, their culture. And yet, she laughed all the time. She loved to laugh. She had she had things that she got mad about. I remember as a kid, she was a fired up lady. But mostly she just loved her family and loved life and had love. Um, she could have fun just talking to anybody. And so, I mean, I think, and my aunts got a lot of that. Of course, my mom, and been able to, I guess, have great role models that have shown me how to, have a good heart and not get downtrodden. And I will say though that the men that I've had in my life, um, I guess a lot of them have struggled probably more so. And I think, there's different reasons for that. Um, but one of the questions I always had growing up was, wow, I wonder if I could ever be an adult and not be in pain and not have to struggle, you know, because I just saw it so much, and I just didn't want to be that way. And you hear about in the music and on TV and the movies, life breaks you, and I just thought, what, I don't think that's true. I mean, what if I just kept getting stronger and better every day instead of getting more broken every day? I mean, what would that look like? You know what I mean? Like, because if you go back to the old ways, and as a historian, thinking about how Native people used to live here in the old days, their way of life, um, they really believed in that ability to get better every day. And whether it was through spiritual work or whatever work that you were going to be doing, you yourself are a project, and you work on yourself. You polish off your edges, and you sharpen the points that need to be sharpened, and all those other things. And so I had that perspective as well, and I understood that in the old days, the reason why they went up and they fasted on the mountain was because they understood no one can do that for you. No one can pick you up and take you up there. You have to walk up on your own. And you do it because you have your own motivations and your own desires. And I think at some point I realized as an adult, you know, I have to I have to listen to those voices. I have to follow that heart that one that I had when I was a little boy, not the one that became jaded and cynical and dark as I grew older. Because I did see, you know, the bad stuff in my community as a kid, and as a teenager became very cynical and barely graduated high school, and because so many of my other friends and peers and relatives were going down a different path, uh, um, and 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 that is hard. That is really really hard because you want to be with that community, you want to share friendships, but at the same time, you understand that you have to go your own path. And I think at some point you realize that no one's going to do that for you. And just like all those thousands of years where people did their own thing, now it's up to you to do your own thing. And let the chips fall where they may. If people don't like it, I guess it's too bad. And if they don't appreciate you trying to get better or wanting to do better for yourself and your family, then maybe they shouldn't be in your life anyway. And so I think it's a great question. And I think it's a daily thing. And I think in this society that we live in today, we have to ask ourselves that every day. We live in a country who elected a vile, racist, despicable human being to run our entire nation. And we have to ask ourselves, why do we want to be here in this country that emulates, respects, and admires that kind of a person? And everyone has to answer that question for themselves. You know what I mean? And then decide what they're going to do about it. I mean, I already go through it every day. And but I think it's interesting too, in Indian country with everything coming down on Indian country right now, federal programs being cut off and all this and that. And one of the refrains that Native people have said was, "Hey, this ain't our first rodeo." I mean, we've been through a lot. We've had people try to wipe us off the face of the earth, the most powerful country on the world try to wipe us off the face of the earth, and it didn't work. So, we're not going anywhere, and we're going to survive this. And when that guy's dead and gone, we'll the next generation. So, we're playing the long game. We're in it for the long haul, and that's the other aspect too. Is that life gets hard. There's a lot of bad things, but you have to remember that there's always hope.
Mhm. Does this strength and autonomy that keeps coming up, does this hinge on a deity or belief in deities for you at all, or is this just a purely kind of a reverence for your ancestors and trying to live their aspirations out, or what?
Yeah, no, this isn't deity and this isn't my ancestors. This is just life. I mean, I'm thinking, I look at all the different webs of life, if you know what I mean, and I know my ancestors did that. So I'm thinking about the insects, I'm thinking about the bacteria, I'm thinking about the animals, I'm thinking about the plants,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm saying to myself, they do their thing, just like that song, I'm Feeling Good, Nina Simone. I was, uh, you know, river running wild, you know how I feel, you know, uh, um, what was it? Bees on the flower, you know how I feel. Butterfly, you know how I feel. That sun in the sky, you know how I feel. That's the native spirituality there. You're a human, but you're in this with all these other living things, and they're just like you. I mean, they have a brief fleeting time, and they just want to have a time that's worth being here for, and then it'll all be over. And so that's kind of how I've embraced it. I don't have any deities. And I don't really believe in any of that. I mean, I'm pretty cynical in any of that. I don't really believe in anything Christianity. Oh my God, no. I mean,
Gotcha.
it's just it's concocted story. You know what I mean? And if whatever works for people, sure, go for it. You know what I mean? But the way I was taught and the way that I most deeply resonate is that each person has to find that meaning and their identity, and it's not going to come from a book, and it's not going to come from somebody telling it to them, but it's going to be all those things, you know. It's going to be, and especially in the modern age, I mean, in the old days, it was easier to just, you know, find your spirit animal or your name or whatever on a mountaintop and then, go on from there. But in this day and age, gee whiz, we're bombarded with constant streams of information. I mean, all the different cultures we're exposed to, ways of life, ways of thinking, ways of being in the world. I mean, it's a non-stop for people who are curious. It's endless stream of options and um, you know details. And so at some point, I think it's you're back to square one again. And who am I? What am I doing here on this planet? What can I do in this short time to make it worthwhile?
You talk about trying to have a ceremony in life every single day without as much time to do it all through the night. What do you still do? You're asking yourself these questions? Do you write about it? Do you meditate on them? What is it for you?
Oh yeah, all those things, all those things, and trying to be more, you know, one person, one way of thinking, one way of doing all day, each day. And so I get up every morning, I try to work. I'm intentional about the work that I do and why I'm doing it and what do I want to achieve from it. And I just keep adding up each day to the next one, thinking, this is all going somewhere. I don't really know exactly where. Um, but one thing that I understand now is that I'm called to duty. I mean, because our world is not in good health right now. And, we need leaders. This world needs leaders, people who are, healthy and have something to offer and something to say that the next generation can use to build. And so, I mean, that's how I feel right now. I mean, it would be great if I have to have all these responsibilities, like climate change and, um, you know, all the other threats that we face to our society. But in fact, we do have those things. And, we have to, at level, address and speak to them if we want to participate as a human being. And if we want to say that we're aware, that we're conscious, and that we're making a difference so that we can keep the web of life more harmonious, more vibrant, more diverse, the way it should be if we didn't bully it and dominate it and treat it like it was just some, you know, another piece of shit thing in our life to move from here to there. And that way of thinking there is what's kind of come to control the United States right now. And I just think to myself, you know what? I'm going to shine like a star and they're not going to stop me. You know what I mean? And one of these days, I'm going to break out and something's going to happen. And you know what? I don't know what it's going to be, but I'm going to be prepared for that moment and that day. And I'm not going to be stopped. And that motivates me every day. How twisted and, demented our nation is right now. And it motivates me. It motivates me to be a better person, to speak the truth and to to let the young people know, you guys can do it. We can do it together, and I'm not giving up. And so yeah, that's part of it. That's a big part of how I frame my life right now, because I think it only makes sense. You frame life in the context of the history that you're living through. I mean, what other way? Why else? You know, and especially with all the tools we have to do that, I think we should take advantage of it.
So it's almost as if you're saying that instead of, facing all of what's going on in the world by curling up in fetal position on our bed scrolling TikTok, we can use it to feel like we need to do something. You're
Well, you're more
using.
important now.
Mm-hmm,
You're more important now than ever before.
mm-hmm,
I say that. There's never been a more important time for good people to shine. There's never been a more important time for smart people to speak out. There's never been a more important time for compassionate people to love each other. There's never been a more important time for smart people to think clearly and give us good ideas. I mean, we're at a breaking point right now, and and a lot of the things are breaking as we speak. And so we need to find what we can do to heal that circle. And all the circles, again, back to the circle metaphor. Life's a circle, every day is a circle. Um, Everything that we interact with has its own circle. And I think healing those circles is part of our daily, task. Um, and we do that at night when we dream. We do it in the morning when we prepare ourselves mentally, spiritually, to love ourselves and to love our neighbors. Um, we prepare. I think back, you know, uh, I've always been a student of history, and always loved history. I mean, that's my thing, kind of. But thinking about, JFK Jr., when he died, I was in Washington, D.C. at an event when his plane crashed. And I remember how, you know, what a shock it was, and how people felt. But I remember watching some clips of him at the time, and one of the things that I think maybe his uncle had told him was, all of life is about preparation, preparation. And I think that to myself too. We have to be prepared to meet the moment, because the moments will come, and they're not going to be good ones. A lot of them, they're going to be bad ones. And we have to be prepared to know what we're going to do to deal with that. And the same for the good opportunities when they come up. We have to be prepared to take advantage. So we have to have good health. We have to have good circles. We have to build those friendships. We have to build those trusting bonds with the people who we interact with, so that when those moments come up, we do things together as a team. We can coalesce as a group to find a way forward as leaders. Um, so yeah, prepare. And how do you prepare? What do you do to prepare? And then how do you know when that moment has arrived? It will reveal itself. If you're paying attention. So yeah, there's a lot there. I know I've said a lot, but I appreciate your questions.
beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. This is good. This is good for me. I needed this right now. So, um,
Oh, of course.
yes. Um, on another note, just to get back into Native people as a whole,
Yeah.
what do you think is missing from mainstream narratives about Native people, other than everything and a lot of mainstream narratives, but some misconceptions.
Yeah. Well, one of the biggest ones is that, years ago we were always fighting with each other. And I think here in Montana, that one's really strong, and even the native people pick up on that.
Mm-hmm.
But, my research, and as a historian and as someone who's really looked deeply into the ancient culture of Montana, is that in fact we didn't always fight. In fact, the truth is we were able to overcome tremendous linguistic obstacles to forge friendships despite all of our linguistic differences. And that's a story that not even really native people really know very much. Um, and it's partly because it's been occluded by, so many years and generations of warfare and trauma and boarding schools and all these things where we were stripped of our knowledge. We were unable to really deconstruct where we came from. So there's that. Um, we're not, bloodthirsty savages, as it turns out. Going way back, if you want to go way back, we were really folks who, there were always men, and there always will be young men who want to compete, and they can find physical ways to do that. The Super Bowl is tomorrow. There's going to be a lot of guys getting their heads bashed in, and and they chose to do that. Because that's what makes them feel good and makes them feel free. And so, I mean, there's that aspect of life. But, most of us are going to be on the couch watching or doing something else completely different. And so, when you when I reflect back on American Indian culture, there were warriors, of course, but the vast majority of the people were not. And they were not spending their time engaging in those kinds of things. They had other things to do. And so, that's a big misconception. I think that it also has to do with the human condition, and so we're kind of taught to believe that not just native people, but people in general have always fought and warred with each other, and that's just only natural and normal. But I don't think I think it's a line. I think it's a lie. I think it was made up. I don't think it's true. And I think just the opposite is true. That we desperately need each other. I mean, we'll do anything to connect with each other, whether it's write a song, whether it's write a poem, whether it's, write some book, whether it's create a new language, um, whether it's dig 1,000 miles through a mountain. It doesn't, we're going to find a way to get to each other. Look at what we do to try to connect into outer space. The money that we spend trying to find something out there.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like, I think that that's a misconception. Native people, just like other people, we like each other, we enjoy each other, we want to be with each other and learn and experience each other. And we also, of course, want to have our own space, just like, you know, anybody else. But um, there's that. And then I think there's the misconception that Native people never really wanted to be a part of American society, that we always wanted to, uh, you know, have our own thing and do our own thing and be separate. And that's not true either. That's not true at all. We've always wanted to be included, you know. And in I remember years ago, one of my great role models, leaders, a guy named Daryl Kipp, he said, you know, he was asked by a non-Indian one time, Daryl, what do Native people want? What do Indians want? And he said, you know what? I'll tell you what we want. We want to be included. That's what we want. And like I said earlier, when I first started off growing up as an Indian, you feel like you're invisible. You're like behind a two-way mirror. You're not included in anything. You're not recognized. You're not remembered. Um, and I think for American society, a lot of them have always believed that, well, Native Americans never wanted to be included. They never wanted to be part of America. They never wanted to assimilate. And that's not true. The one caveat there is maybe we didn't want to assimilate, but that doesn't mean we didn't want to be included. Is it okay if we have our own way of, being and still be a part of American culture. I mean, I thought to me that was like the American way, right? Like we all have our own look, we have our own values, but we're still Americans. And
Hmm.
so I think there's that. I think, and then finally, the last thing I would say on that is that Native people have always been misunderstood. Like you said, from when you contextualize your question, besides everything, you got it right there. And the reason why we've been so misunderstood is because, again, we have an oral tradition, and people are not able to really read about our history. If I want to learn about other societies and cultures around the world, I turn to a book. But you can't do that with Native people because we didn't have a literate tradition, and so much of our society and our culture and our way of being remains a mystery because it still to this day has not been written down. And that might seem kind of like astonishing too, but it's true. I think even today in 2025, the vast majority of tribal culture has never really been articulated in a book and is unavailable through other digital means. And you just have to go and you have to be with Native people and you have to spend the time and experience that to really understand.
Wow, I had never thought about that. Like how much of an impact not having stuff written down could have on our entire interpretation of a culture.
Yeah, that really struck me when I saw that movie Invictus, and Nelson Mandela said, when I was in prison, I read every book about these white people. There's not a thing that these fuckers can tell me that I already don't know about them. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
know all their poems, I know all their histories, I know, and I just thought to myself, wow, that is something to say, man. You know what I mean? I love that on so many levels. But what is so ironic about all that is that, he could spend, 100 years in a prison cell and not learn a single thing about Indians
So true.
because, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of crazy to think about. And on that same level, along that same way of thinking, when a tribal elder dies, if they haven't written stuff down, there's like a whole library burns up. You know what I mean? It's really uh, it's a until we really understand the oral tradition, it's a mystery. And it's something that people are always going to want to learn more about, but you can really only experience it through, like you said, like your experience going to Crow and seeing what people were doing there, and just that snapshot that you got there. You know, you could see that things were different, and that people are a little bit different, but there's still a mystery as how different and why. Um, and so yeah, that's part of the oral tradition. I think that keeps me always wanting to learn more.
Mm-hmm. Well, to sum it all up, so for people who want to learn more, books, there's probably some books out there, there's probably some interviews out there, but you think the best thing we could do is try to go connect with Native people in real life. My question is, how can we do this without seeming like anthropologists who are trying to conduct a study? Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, it's a good question. Well, let me clarify, I guess, again.
sure.
You can learn a lot about Native people through books and through TV now.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the vast majority of what goes on in tribal communities is unrecorded, I guess is what I would have would, would be more accurate. But if you watch videos or tapes and of tribal elders, you can find them online. It doesn't take a lot of searching to find some great tribal representatives that can speak to those things, but there's also a context that is missing, I guess, is the biggest thing from academic learning of Native people. You know, and that context is what really allows us to deconstruct and build up our knowledge. And so I would say you don't have to be an anthropologist. You can go or act like an anthropologist. You can just go to, a tribal event, powwow, or some other kind of a community event, and not even ask any questions, just observe,
Hmm.
and just have some conversations with people, and just take it in. And I think you'll begin to see that there's a way of being and a way of thinking about how we connect to each other as people that is very much embedded deeply in tribal thinking, tribal being, and you'll hear the language that's used is a little bit different. There's like a code sometimes that, for lack of a better term, um, and so you can learn a lot. Like if you took a class on Native people, for example, and you watched movies and read books, you could learn quite a bit. But until you actually went into those communities and experienced the context of your interaction with them, um, there would be a lot left unlearned. There would be a lot
Hmm.
left unsaid.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There is so much beauty in not just asking questions, not just going with an intellectual perspective. And this is ironic to say in an interview, but just taking it in, you know,
Yeah.
direct firsthand experience. So
Yep.
thank you, Shane.
Yep. Absolutely.
This has been such an informative hour. Seriously, really appreciate it. And is there anything other than what's on your MSU page that you'd like to share?
Oh yeah, I started a new nonprofit,
Mm,
and so we will have. I can. Uh, I'll email you the website. It's still kind of under construction.
sure.
Yep. But my new nonprofit, we're going to be putting on a teepee village in the Yellowstone Park every September.
Whoa.
And
Okay.
yeah, we're going to have, tribal representatives from all the nations um, that are connected to the Yellowstone Park. And we'll have tribal elders and youth. And we're going to invite, public schools to come and learn about the tribal histories of the Yellowstone Park and the sacred nature of that landscape there, and how Native people have always seen it as, a sacred place for healing and for ceremony and for gathering. And so the name of my nonprofit is Yellowstone Peoples.
Gotcha.
So keep that in mind, and I'll email you that website later today.
Yeah. Would you be interested in some college students joining you for that, possibly, or just for?
Oh, of course,
Oh, okay.
of course,
Okay.
love to.
That would be amazing. I'll have to. Okay. Cool. We'll keep in touch.
It'd be great if you could come out and do a podcast at the Teepee Village.
Whoa. Okay. I would love that.
Yeah. So keep that on your docket. So I'll keep you apprised of the dates as we come down. But right now we're in the fundraising stage. It looks like we're going to raise a lot of money. So I'm really hopeful, and you know, um, I'll keep you posted.
Yeah, and I'll share that too. Well, again, thank you so much. Gave me so much to think about. I'm sure it's going to give everyone else a lot to think about. So, yeah,
Hey, thank you. You're a great young man, and I really appreciate this work you're doing. Not a lot of people are doing it. It's really important to spread the word about spirituality and how it's a kind of a foundation for everything we do in this world. And as a Native person, I really feel like that's more of an identity to myself and my community, and than anything else. And so it's a real honor to be able to speak to you about that. I'm excited for your future, and I hope you can come out here to Montana again, and we'll look forward to seeing you in person again. And good
so
luck with your podcast, and keep me posted.
thank you so much. Hopefully I'll see you one of those Septembers.
Absolutely.
Have a
Take care,
beautiful
Jared.
rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. So long. Like your
So long.
t-shirt, by the way.
Thank you. Montana radio
Yeah,
station, Montana State, KGLT.
love it.
Yes.
Yes,
Had to
yes.
rock it for
Thursday
today.
mornings
So
they have that cowgirl thing. It's pretty funny.
I'll have to look it up. I don't know what you're
Check it
talking
out sometime.
about.
Yeah,
Okay.
you'll really like it.
Cool.
Cool, brother.
All
Cheers,
right.
man.
So long.
See you.